The gospel reading this morning is from the 14th chapter of Luke, verses 15 through 24. You can find this on page 77 of the New Testament in your Pew Bible. Just preceding this passage, Jesus has been invited to a dinner, and he has told his host that when he gives a banquet, he shouldn't just invite all his friends and the rich people. He should invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and then you will be blessed. Beginning at verse 15. One of the dinner guests, on hearing this, said to Jesus, "Blessed is the one who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." Then Jesus said to him, "Someone gave a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready now.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I have bought a piece of land, and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I have just been married, and therefore I cannot come.' So the slave returned and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, 'Go out at once into the streets and lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And the slave said, 'Sir, what you ordered has been done, and there is still room.' Then the master said to the slave, 'Go out into the roads and the lanes, and compel people to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who are invited will taste my dinner.'" The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Rescues are always dramatic, aren't they? I mean, almost always. You rarely see a rescue that is bland or ordinary. There's always a dramatic element to it. And we know that Hollywood knows this. Hollywood makes some amazing movies about rescues. The first thing that comes into my mind, one of my favorite movies, is The Perfect Storm, which is about not just the Andrea Gale, which sung, but about the National Guard, the parajumpers for both the Coast Guard and the National Guard that went out to rescue many that were in this storm. But ordinary people can be rescuers as well. You don't have to be trained to rescue others. Does anyone remember Hurricane Harvey when it hit Houston and literally flooded that whole Houston area? And a flotilla of just ordinary people. They took their boats. They came from Louisiana, from other parts of Texas, from all throughout the South and Missouri. They brought their boats. And they were smaller boats because they didn't draft as deep. They could ride those streets, those flooded streets and highways, and they went out into that whole region and rescued people who were stranded in their houses. And they saved lives. And that was an amazing thing to see. They weren't trained to do that, but they had what they needed. They had the boats. So they simply went out, they helped each other, and they did an amazing job. Rescue stories are always interesting. They're always amazing. And it's amazing also to think that one of the earliest and most dramatic water rescues, and I think water rescues are the most dramatic because they have such a time limit to them. You have to get people out of the water. And here we are reading one of the most dramatic water rescues ever recorded, and it's from one of the earliest parts of the Bible. And just like any water rescue story, it has certain elements in common. One, there is a victim in the story. There is one in need of being rescued. And the other, there is a rescuer. And in this case, like in most of these water rescue stories, it is a team effort. There are several rescuers. Now, of course, as we heard the story from Exodus, we know who the victim is. The victim was the infant Moses. At a time when too many, according to the Pharaoh, too many of the Hebrew slaves were being born, too many male slaves, and the Pharaoh and the Pharaoh's government was threatened because, like any nation that has slaves, they could not allow the slaves to outnumber the owners, the owning population. They could not allow that to happen. So Pharaoh's decision, a decision which we have seen before in the Bible, was to kill the newborn male slaves. That was the decision. And so that was what Pharaoh ordered, and that began to happen. So Moses, who had just been born, was actually 3 months old, was one who was set to be a victim. And Moses' mother, whose name we really don't know, decided to make a desperate act. And that was to create this basket, this floating basket, put the infant Moses into it, and float it down the river Nile. And who was to come along and save it was another woman, an Egyptian woman. But not just an ordinary Egyptian woman. That's what's amazing about the story. It is the boundaries that are crossed in this rescuing of this infant. There's a legal boundary. Pharaoh has ordered that not only will not any newborn Hebrew male slaves be rescued, but that they will be executed. But Pharaoh's daughter crosses that boundary, and Moses' mother crosses that boundary, a legal boundary. There is a social boundary between a slave woman, who is a mother, and a member of the royal house, who is a woman. These two women are at totally opposite ends. Talk about a boundary. That's a chasm between slaves and the royal house. I can't even imagine a wider social boundary in this story. And of course, there is a religious boundary. There is the Hebrews are the people of God. They're not the nation yet, but they are God's beloved people. Not the nation Israel yet. That was to come. They're God's beloved people, called out by Abraham. And then there is Pharaoh's religion, the religion of Egypt, the religion of gods, the religion of Isis, the religion of all these different ideas, the many gods versus the one God. So there's this huge religious boundary as well. And I think it's also interesting in this story that both women are anonymous. We don't know the name of Pharaoh's daughter. Now that's what they had in common, because they were on another side, both of them on the side of another boundary. The boundary between male and female in that culture. Males, particularly prominent males, were named. We know the names of the pharaohs. We know the names of some of their prominent court members, but we don't know many. We know Cleopatra, there's one. We don't know many names of females, and we don't know hardly, I don't know if historically, except the Bible, we know any names of female slaves. We don't, as far as I know. So, we have this wonderful story where two women are willing to cross these very strong boundaries and take a risk to rescue this child. So, what was it that motivated these two women? What was it that enabled these two women, that drove these women to cross these incredibly dangerous and risky boundaries, cross them to save this child? Well, they shared a care and a concern for an infant. They shared love and compassion. And you'll notice that it took sacrifice on both sides to rescue this infant. Moses' mother had to sacrifice giving up the child in order for the child, for Moses to live. Pharaoh's daughter had to sacrifice or risk her being caught by her family to raise this child. She had to also risk by hiding who Moses was, that this was the child of a Hebrew slave. She was going to raise Moses as one of the royal family. So they both had to take risks. But in their love and compassion for this infant, for this child, they were willing to cross those boundaries. They were willing to make that risk. That's something to think about, isn't it, in this time. in this country, right? I think it is. I think we've got a lot to think about when we think about this story. I notice nobody's really applied this story to things that are happening right now in our nation, but maybe we ought to. I think that's a story we ought to be thinking about. Okay? I think so. So, what really happened here? That's interesting. When I was at the University of North Carolina, and I was in the senior seminar studying the Old Testament, this was like my last year before I graduated in my major, we had a visiting professor in the class from Duke University, Dr. Cal Bland. Dr. Bland was a rabbi. He was rabbinic. And he taught us this story. And I'll never forget what he said. He said to us, "Do you think this was a coincidence? Do you think this just happened? That it just so happened that this woman, this mother of a slave, took her baby and put him into the Nile, left them floating, and it just so happened Pharaoh's daughter, right down the bank, showed up, and that Moses' older sister snuck up there to watch what happened, and that Pharaoh's daughter happened to pick the baby up and took it in?" He said, "Absolutely not." He said, "This was a planned rescue. This was not coincidence." And guess who the daughter of Pharaoh took in to help her raise the child Moses? It happened to be Moses' mother. What a coincidence. But Dr. Bland said, no, it wasn't. He said it was not at all. He said these were two very clever women saving this child. I never forgot that. And he did it. I wish I could do it the way he told the story. But it made me see the story in a new way and showed the way that people, even across boundaries, would come together to do the will of God. And we must not forget that though this rescue was planned by these two women to save this child, God also had a plan with this child. Because the rescue of Moses, the crossing of these boundaries, enabled Moses to rescue God's people. And Moses was the one who would give the people the law and lead the people to the promised land. All because these two women who cared and loved this child figured out how to help each other, figured out how to love one that was in need. They drew that child out of the water and saved him. Now, if you think about that, that's a thing that occurs throughout the Bible. The God of the Old Testament is a God of many rescues. Think about Joseph. Joseph was saved from the pit when he was thrown in there by his brothers. He was rescued, taken into Pharaoh's house, became second of command. And then later on, as an adult, Joseph rescued his family from famine and was able to rescue his people from famine. And then, of course, there's the story of David. When David was being chased by Saul, Saul was angry, wanting to kill David. David snuck into the house of a woman Michal, who in the middle of the night lured him in a basket out her window. As Saul and the soldiers were drawing closer. That's a really great story. One of the best ones. Then there's the great story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were thrown into the fiery furnace. And Daniel, who's thrown into the lion's den. Fire doesn't burn, and the lions sit there purring. God rescues. And then one of my favorite rescue stories is Jonah, where no people are involved. Jonah is rescued by a whale. Jonah doesn't really want to be rescued because he doesn't want to go preach in Nineveh, but God does swallow him up, spits him out, and says, "You got to go do this." So he's rescued for a purpose. That ongoing theme of God rescuing God's people using acts of compassion to fulfill God's ultimate purpose. And so we come to the New Testament. And yes, the New Testament begins, the Gospel of Matthew, with a rescue story. The rescue story. We all think, when we celebrate Christmas, what do? We give gifts. Where does that come from? The story of the Magi, right? Magi bring gifts to the newborn Christ. But it is not a story about gift giving. It is a story of a rescue. It's the story of a rescue. It's the story of when Jesus is born. And here come the Magi to follow the star, and they tell Herod why they are there. And Herod, being jealous that possibly the Messiah has been born, tries to get that information, sends the Magi out to find the child and come back and tell them. Right? And so the Magi go, they find the child, they bring the gifts to honor the newborn king, but they are warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. So here is God directly intervening and rescuing the infant. But even more, those gifts, they weren't just given to honor Christ. When Herod ordered that the firstborn of Israel be killed, the firstborn male, does that story sound familiar from Exodus? Story sound familiar? The Joseph and Mary take those gifts and they use them to flee to Egypt. Take Christ with them to Egypt so that he may live while these terrible things are happening back in Israel. And those gifts are used for that. So I wonder if it might even be more appropriate when we celebrate Christmas, not just to give gifts to each other, but to give gifts to rescue other people. Which is what the story is really about. If we think about it. We want to make a practical application of that story to our celebration of the birth of Christ. Maybe again, that's something that we ought to think about. As God rescued Christ, so did Christ announce that the Messiah had come to save the world. That was the will of the Father, fulfilling God's will. And then we look at Jesus' healing and preaching ministry, which was certainly a ministry of rescue. Of course, we know that healing would be rescuing many people in desperate circumstances. But his preaching, we think about the story of the woman caught in adultery who was about to be stoned. And Jesus says, "You who are without sin, cast the first stone." He kept that from happening. Jesus definitely rescued people from the law, from the consequences of the law, and from the consequences of their religion. So Jesus not only came in the sense of saving people through his death, but as he did his ministry, he rescued many, many people. And then he called his disciples to him. To do what? Those that followed Christ were called not just to cross boundaries and borders with this message of the good news in order to save the world, but literally they were called, all who follow Christ, were called to make those boundaries and borders disappear. What were the words of Christ's first sermon in the New Testament? The kingdom of God is upon you. And the kingdom of God, this idea, this concept, introduced to the world by Christ, the kingdom of God, did not have and does not have boundaries and borders. The kingdom of God welcomes and includes everyone. That was the idea. No one had ever heard such an idea. But that's what Jesus preached. That was what he initially preached. That was the heart of his message. The kingdom of God is here, now. Boundaries are gone. The borders are erased. You are to live your life in a spiritual way, to follow and worship a spiritual king. That's why Jesus told this parable, the great dinner, because the great dinner is an illustration of the kingdom of God. It is a vision of the kingdom of God. It is what it would look like. Jesus used the image of dinner, a great dinner, many times to describe the kingdom of God. In fact, this that we celebrate here is kind of what Jesus called, this is, you eat with me now, because one day you will eat with me in my kingdom. So this is a precursor. When we take the cup of the bread, it is a precursor to the great meal. So what happens in the story that we heard just a moment ago, in this parable that Jesus tells? Well, this householder, the owner of the house, wants to have a great dinner, a party, and invite everybody, invite people to it. So he goes out and invites people that you would expect him to invite. His friends, his colleagues, co-workers, neighbors, people that he knows, probably people that look like him, and talk like him, and act like him. So he goes out and invites them. And what's happened? They make excuses. They make excuses. I have a headache. I can't come. I'm doing my hair. I mean, all kinds of excuses, you know. I'm busy right now. Maybe later. Or my favorite, sure, I'll be there. And of course, they don't even show up, right? They make excuses, right? They're invited to this wonderful party. And some of the excuses actually are lamer than the ones I just described. The real excuse is used in the parable. You know, I have to go do this first. I have to go do that first. So, what does the householder do? He tells his slaves, go out anywhere and invite anyone to come to my dinner. Because I have this wonderful meal, and I'm going to fill my house with people who need it and who want to be there. I love the language of the Old Testament. Go into the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in. No boundaries, no borders, no social, no religious, no physical border. Just go out, find them, and bring them in. Bring them in. We will share a feast together. The call of Christ is about drawing out those in need from their despair and their suffering, but that is not where the call stops. It also brings people in to a life that is the kingdom of God, a welcoming place, a place not of religion, but of fellowship and love. We do not help people at a distance. We may help people who are distant, true, but we want to bring them into the love of Christ, along with drawing them out of their despair and their need. It is our call to connect to them in the name of Christ. And there are no boundaries, borders to making that connection. Think of what this table does for us. This table draws us out of sin, doesn't it? It draws us out of sin. That's what it's for. It calls us to come and confess. It draws us out of sin. But it also brings us together in fellowship. We become one around this table. Our need for forgiveness is met. But we don't just walk away with that. Something happens to us. We are made one with the Spirit. We are made a people in the kingdom. We are made citizens of the kingdom of God. There's a juvenile series of books, novels, called The Warriors. And one of the characters in that book says this, quote, the only true borders lie between day and night, between life and death, between hope and loss. We can think of some other true borders as well. Right, wrong. Many, many true borders, not artificial lines drawn by people on some map. Those are the true borders and boundaries, and we are called as a people to bring people across those boundaries, bring them from death to life, bring them from despair into hope, bring them from night to the day of brightness of Christ's love. Draw them out, bring them in. Let us do so as we come to this table. commit ourselves to serving our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.